About a month ago, I was enjoying my normal Sunday activity of avoiding the start of the work week by curling up in a fetal position watching Instagram reels and eating Uncrustables until I passed out when I was hit with a wave of nostalgia. I started thinking about things from my childhood like Pokemon, the Lego games, how my elementary school banned pixie sticks because kids kept snorting them during recess, and then I landed on Star Wars. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm the biggest Star Wars fan in the world, but that was my shit when I was younger. I grew up on the prequels, and when my parents showed me the originals, I loved those too. Anyway, like many others, I drifted away from the franchise during the sequel trilogy. I watched and enjoyed Rogue One and the first two seasons of The Mandalorian, but other than that, I never really felt the desire to consume new Star Wars content, especially considering the lukewarm to horrible reviews that a lot of it received. But then there was Andor. I heard almost exclusively really good things about it, and while I was a bit skeptical at first that it was just some propaganda from Disney bots, it turns out that shit absolutely smacks. Now, the second season hasn't dropped yet at the time of recording this, so if it sucks, then fuck me, I guess. But the first season isn't just great Star Wars, it's great TV, period. And so when I finished watching it, the question on my mind was what happened to make this show so good when it seemed like the rest of live action Star Wars was stuck in the shitter? Well, I ended up watching all 7 of the live action Star Wars shows to try to answer this question. Was it worth it? Not really, no. But they also weren't as bad and as painful to watch as I was expecting. Really, their biggest crime is feeling personalityless and like there wasn't a real attempt to make a great show, but just an inoffensive one. Unfortunately, that's not enough anymore, and is a big reason why the backlash to these shows is harsher than they maybe deserve in a vacuum. At the end of the day, most people want good shows, and when you have a franchise where creativity and endless possibilities is an integral part of the concept, and you're backed by a company that seemingly has limitless money, people expect more than some half-baked stories that are over-reliant on fan service to keep audiences interested. I know that plenty of people have already ripped a new one into these shows, and I'm not here to keep beating that dead horse. I might slip in a couple kicks here and there, but still. I do, however, want to go over some of the pitfalls that drag these other shows down and highlight how a show like Andor avoided them. The prevalence of these vary from show to show, but the overarching issues I found were rushed narratives and a lack of focus, underdeveloped characters and stakes, and too much reliance on uninteresting on-the-nose exposition. Also, I'm looking at how these shows stand as individual projects. I haven't seen the animated shows like Clone Wars or Rebels, so if you're telling me that Ahsoka's actually great if you consider shit from those shows, for instance, cool. But in my opinion, it's a flaw if my enjoyment of the show hinges on watching a separate project. As a last preface, spoiler warning for all the shows, so if you're itching to watch Obi Wan or something, go ahead and do that now or skip ahead. Trust me, there's not much of a spoiler I could give for that even if I wanted to, but whatever. Okay, that's all my damage control, so let's get into it. Even with the pretty steep fall off of Season 3, The Mandalorian is a good show with great moments. The character design, special effects, and just generally how it looks is mostly great. The combat and action sequences are almost always really fun, like the gun that just eviscerates people is so dope. I also really like Mando as a character and think Pedro Pascal did a really good job as always, and like the Western influence behind his design. And as much as I think his popularity probably prevented the show from going in the direction it wanted to, the fucking Baby Yoda idea was a home run, and he really was charming. I also think the dynamic that grew between Din and Grogu was really compelling, and I actually cared about the two of them. And while I don't think that comedy or even really writing was a strength, there was some pretty funny moments. And some strong dramatic moments.
Look outside. Is the world more peaceful since the revolution?
With that being said, I do think that the issues we see in Season 3 were the same issues the show had before, just obviously accentuated. And in the first 2 seasons, they felt like less of an issue because overall the show was still good and fun. But I can't help but feel they were holding it back from being a really great show even before that last season. For one, the actual core through lines and conflicts of the seasons were actually quite strong and engaging ideas, but really none of them ended up getting the time and development they deserved because the show was so adamant to spend several episodes doing straight up side quests and giving arcs to almost every single character who says more than 3 words. For instance, in the first season, we have 3 of the 8 episodes devoted to these side quests where Mando helps some farmers fight some raiders, helps a rookie bounty hunter on his first job, and then helps Bill Burr and the boys do a prison breakout. And look, these episodes aren't terrible, and they have good moments. I actually think the prison episode especially is pretty fun and great, and Bill Burr did fucking amazing. Like, seriously, he was one of the best side characters of any of the shows. But still, I thought the show did such a strong job at establishing the main story in the first few episodes, with the scenes of Mando interacting with the client and the reveal of Grogu, and using this conflict effectively to show that Din has a conscience and isn't just a cold-blooded, emotionless killer. They then push this even further when Mando decides to save Grogu despite it putting a huge target on his back, burning all his bridges with the guild, and leading to his clan being uprooted from their hiding spot and many dying. This was all great and made me feel invested in what was happening. But then this is all practically ignored for the next 3 episodes doing those side quests I mentioned, and it really took some of the wind out of its sails. The season still ended up doing a pretty good job at building the overarching story since the last 2 episodes locked back in and were great, but I really do think that tying these episodes into the main narrative a bit more, or showing some kind of meaningful development, would have helped the story feel more cohesive. Alternatively, you could just make the episodes more interesting. Again, I didn't have much of an issue with the prison break episode, even though it didn't really push the plot, because it was a good time and executed well. I don't really understand how Hellboy got crushed by those doors and made it out with just a headache, but still. On the other hand, I just wasn't very grabbed by seeing a bunch of random farmers get a training montage, and then defeating a fucking ATST without losing like anybody by getting it to walk into a stream. Again, it wasn't terrible, it just wasn't the same level that we saw from the main story. Season 2 is pretty much the same situation where you have the show at its best when it follows the greater story, and then a relatively mixed bag of side quest episodes. But then in Season 3, these side quests were notably less fun and coherent, and seemingly happened even more. You have Episode 1 where Mando's trying to get IG-11 rebuilt, and then ends up killing some pirates. You have the episode where a raptor steals a Mandalorian kid, who we didn't even know was Paz's son till the very end, and somehow chilled an entire day in its mouth and was fine. And then you have the episode with the scientists and Moff Gideon's number 2.
All these people working together to make something better makes me feel rather insignificant.
My brother in Christ, on what planet would I want to see these 2 characters eat some fucking ice cones right now? And as if that wasn't enough, you have the Jack Black and Lizzo episode.
Finally settled and we fell in love.
We fell in love. We did fall in love.
Look, I don't even mind the decision to have Mando going on these little side missions since it thematically fits with him being a bounty hunter, and again, not all of it was bad. But I was rarely as invested in these episodes as I was in the main narrative, and that goes for all 3 seasons. I would have loved to see more done with Moff Gideon. I don't know why Giancarlo Esposito gets underutilized in everything that's not Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, but the man deserves better. He's a fucking scene stealer. Moff Gideon was literally the root of the foundational conflict in the show. He is the whole reason that Mando found Grogu and is now on the run, and not just continuing with his regular bounty hunter life. But then we basically spend more time watching fucking Lizzo play with Baby Yoda than we see of his master plan and purpose being fleshed out. We only see he's using Grogu's blood for some genetic engineering halfway through Season 2 when we get a brief scene of the protagonist accidentally stumbling upon a lab. And then we only really see any more in the finale. And not the finale of Season 2, mind you, I mean the finale of the show. We finally get his whole master plan, which is making an army of Force-sensitive clones of himself to put in Dark Trooper suits. And I'm not exaggerating, we get a single minute of this before one of the most comically dissatisfying resolutions to a plotline I've ever seen.
Let's go.
And unfortunately, most of these overarching narratives end in a similarly flat way. We spend the whole second season so Grogu can go off with the Jedi, and then the little fucker's right back to start the 3rd season.
What?
At the time of watching, I had no idea that they covered the in-between time in the Book of Boba Fett, so I was just convinced I must have hallucinated that plotline. It literally felt like the Disney higher-ups intervened so their sweet little green prince wasn't missing any screen time, and this is rumored to be the case. But regardless, it was such a misstep to not let the aftermath of this decision breathe for a bit. As much as I didn't like the decision to basically fully CGI Luke and his voice instead of using a different Jedi or just recasting, since he felt lifeless and distracted from the emotional high point of the entire show when Grogu and Din said goodbye, I still thought it was strong. Then it just gets erased after not even an episode. And even if you do include the Mandalorian episodes they just sandwiched into Book of Boba Fett, I still don't think they did that plotline justice. And then you have the Darksaber. It looks dope. I like the mechanic where it's not easy to use and it gets heavier if you don't use it correctly. And I really like how it presented an interesting future dynamic between Mando, who doesn't really care about it, and Bo-Katan, who wants it more than anything so she can rule Mandalore. Man, it'll be so interesting to see how this unfolds. Are they going to end up unwillingly fighting to death, or is Din just going to be thrust into being a leader, just like how he was thrust into being a father? No, okay, we're just going to spend 30 seconds at the end of the Lizzo episode where he gives her the Darksaber because of a boring narrative convenience. Part of the issue, too, is that I didn't feel like the show did a great job at allocating the right amount of time for character development to the right characters. As unceremonious as the execution of Bo-Katan getting the Darksaber was, I can't say that I really felt the importance of her getting it in the first place. Why do they believe the person who wields the Darksaber is the rightful heir to Mandalore? And why is it so important to Bo-Katan specifically to be the ruler? Yeah, I know they tell us 15 times how the ruler needs the Darksaber, and how Bo-Katan comes from royalty, but it's not enough to just plainly say something and then expect the viewers to care. We care about the relationship between Din and Grogu because we spend time with them and see them develop, but we're not just going to root for Bo-Katan to get the Darksaber back just because we see her sulking and being salty she doesn't have it. It's just like how randomly throwing in a big beast for the heroes to fight, where they all basically come out of it unscathed, which is a formula that got more screen time than my fake calculator app got in middle school, doesn't make me feel like the characters are really in any danger and that I should be concerned or engaged. The show at times feels like it wants to give every small character some type of arc or importance. While it works sometimes, it also ends up creating a bunch of shallow characters who overstay their welcome and prevents them from meaningfully fleshing out the characters who are really supposed to be important to the plot. There are ways to build characters and dynamics effectively in limited screen time, and I think this is something that Andor does a great job at. But that takes some great writing or dialogue, and a balancing of the scope and the value of a character. I know that was quite a bit of criticism, but that's only because I think this show just had a lot of wasted potential. I still liked it, and at times loved it, and it was my second favorite of the shows I watched here. But I can't help but feeling disappointed that it couldn't hold on to those high highs that it reached, and most of that can be attributed to its inability to focus on the narratives and characters that got it to those peaks. Now, if you've watched any other content on the Star Wars shows, you probably know that the Book of Boba Fett is a lot of people's top choice as the worst Star Wars show. And yeah, even if you're being generous, this is at best the second worst of the shows, but it's not as terrible as most people say. I went into this with an eyedropper full of bleach by my side the whole time, expecting some heinous dog shit, but really it's kind of just mid with a few fun moments and a few more weak moments. Except for the Vespa chase scene. Like, Jesus, man. I think I contracted AIDS directly in my eyes from watching that shit. Just truly abhorrent. Anyway, positives. As usual for Star Wars, the score is pretty good, and it probably has my favorite theme song. I'm not going to play it right now because I don't want Disney to airstrike my house, but shit slaps. Also, as much as I think the characterization of Boba Fett that we got was pretty disappointing, Temuera Morrison does a pretty good job all things considering, and then the fucking costume is just so sick, man. Honestly, maybe the show should have just been a 360 display of it. There were also some fun side characters and moments. I liked the brief appearance of the Hutts and how they tried to get Boba Fett killed and then after just go, "Yep, sorry, that was us. Peace out though, brother." And I also thought the Wookiee assassin Chrysanthemum was pretty fun. Cad Bane was underutilized, but he was also pretty cool, and I liked how they let him and the antagonists actually do some shit so it feels like they're a genuine threat, like when they blew up the casino and shot Cobb Vanth. Now, this ended up getting wasted in the finale, but in the moment I enjoyed that. And even though their inclusion is one of my biggest complaints with the show, the Mandalorian episodes are good, and I especially really liked everything on that ring planet. Him slicing that dude in half with a darksaber and then bringing out his head in a bag was dope. And it would have been nice to see more shit like that actually in his show, but whatever. Now, does all that make the show worth watching? I mean, I guess if you want to see those 2 Mandalorian episodes and get some much needed, slightly underwhelming explanations for season 3, but other than that, not really. For one, the action's pretty weak. There are some glimpses of fun stuff here and there, but a lot of it's just really basic, and it just doesn't do enough to make up for the lack of substance in the episodes. Also, I don't know if it's just me, but especially in the first half of the show, I felt like the quote-unquote high points of the action was just repeatedly these slow-mo shots with exaggerated poses and pretty ridiculous sound design. I felt like I was watching a Rebel Moon spin-off or something. And then, I know the finale's been criticized a lot, and for good reason, but genuinely, the lack of creativity in the action really stands out there. For a second, I thought they were really gonna just end the conflict with the negotiation, and I was about to get pissed, but then when Mando and Boba Fett flew out on their jetpacks, it was fun. Unfortunately, that's when the fun ended, because then the climax of the finale was just a bunch of people standing around, peeking and shooting, and then these 2 needlessly big droids come in, which aren't able to kill like a single person, even though they're basically all running away in a straight line in the middle of the street, and Mando and Boba Fett even just stand there right in front of them talking half the time. It really blows my mind that you set up Cad Bane as a pretty dangerous and capable bounty hunter, but then you just don't use him at all in the finale until like the very end when he does his 1v1 with Boba, which is just mostly talking. Why wasn't he the main danger in this episode? I would have much rather watched him be this sort of boogeyman going around picking off the side characters and then have an actual showdown between him and Boba Fett than a couple of big droids and a bunch of faceless pikes. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they just completely forgot about him until the end and just threw it in to do something. I mean, that'd also explain why they reversed the only meaningful thing he did in shooting Cobb Vanth in the mid-credit scene. But the main problem with this show is that it doesn't make you care about anything. Like, I didn't care about the main characters, let alone the fucking mods. Boba Fett and Fennec both have moments where they're fun or cool. For instance, I thought the scene where Fennec assassinated a whole room of antagonists and hanged the mayor was pretty sick. But they barely give Fennec a personality outside of being competent, I guess. And then for Boba Fett, they just kind of try to make him this vaguely good guy because God forbid you have a protagonist who isn't a good person. Part of the reason people gravitated to Boba Fett so much in the original trilogy is he was this mysterious guy who looked sick. And yeah, admittedly that's not a whole lot to build a character on, but it would have been nice to see this incorporated in some way. Still give us the necessary motivations so the plot makes sense, but maybe add some darkness or unpredictability to his character or something. Also, for them being partners, we don't see him and Fennec have any meaningful interactions, or really any sort of attempt to build their characters or the dynamic between them. We never see either of them grapple with their near-death experiences even a little. We never see why Fennec was so down to just abandon any life she had previously and just stay with Boba Fett. But worst of all, we never see the thoughts or feelings that led Boba Fett to being fed up with working for others and wanting to be in charge himself, which again was kind of the driving force of the plot. And it ends up feeling even more pointless by the end when he's just like, I guess we weren't meant to be leaders after all, huh, Fennec? Some of this definitely could have been fixed with some better writing and dialogue, but again, they also didn't give the story they were trying to tell much room to grow. Obviously, a lot of this can be attributed to the fact that 2 of the last 3 episodes are 90% just The Mandalorian. In episode 5, Fennec comes in with a few minutes left to tell Mando they have a job for him, and then like 3/4 of episode 6 is spent on Grogu's storyline with Luke. Again, this was 100% Disney management intervening to try and get more viewers, but that was so short-sighted. What this ended up doing was now neither the Book of Boba Fett nor The Mandalorian Season 3 work on their own. If you watch Season 3 without this like I did, you're missing pretty important information and developments. And even then, they only had so much time in these 2 episodes, and Grogu and Mando reuniting still felt super rushed. And in terms of the Book of Boba Fett, this made it so its story didn't really even have a fighting chance. Yeah, sure, I can't say I was super invested in what was happening before this, but I really think that any show would suffer if you derailed the story like that in the most important episodes. And because of this, the decision to spend about half of the first 3 episodes focusing on Boba Fett and the Tuskens seems even worse. There were some good moments in that part of the narrative, and I like the idea of fleshing out the Tuskens and their culture and showing how Boba went from a prisoner to an ally, but it wasn't strong enough to spend that much of the limited time on. Last thing before I move on, what a waste not focusing on how Boba Fett got to power in the first place. It would have been so much more interesting to see this sort of Penguin-esque type of narrative, where he has to find a way to usurp Bib Fortuna and the Hutts and do some shady shit to get what he wants. But instead, this is how they handle the most interesting part of the show's premise.
What the hell is even that?
Definitely not saying this would have been at the level of the Penguin or like the Sopranos in space, but that would have felt more like a story worth telling and one that would have paid better respects to a fan favorite character. My best descriptor of Obi Wan Kenobi as a show is a mixed bag. A lot of it's just okay, but then you sporadically have some really good moments, while also having some of the worst moments in any of the shows. Starting again with the positives, there are some fun side characters here. I liked Harja. I thought he was actually pretty charming and didn't overstay his welcome, so that was kind of a breath of fresh air. I'm not sure why Riva didn't kill him at the end of their interaction, but shout out Dinesh. I also think the 5th brother was good, and I liked the performance by Sung Kang. I know some people don't like the visual adaptation of his character from Rebels, but I thought the character was pretty solid, and I liked his little beef with Riva. He kind of just disappears in the second half of the show though, which is a bit of a waste. Like, I don't understand why they brought back the Grand Inquisitor after Riva stabbed him for a few pointless scenes, when they could have just stood on that decision and given that small role to the 5th brother instead. The show does that twice, by the way, where someone gets stabbed by a fucking lightsaber and then is just fine after. So, I guess moral of the story is Qui-Gon's a pussy. Anyway, I wish we got more Owen, man. Even though he has like 5.5 lines, Joel Edgerton still gives one of the better performances, and you can really feel his disdain for the Jedis in Obi-Wan. And shout out Aunt Beru too. Another thing I liked was some of the ideas in Obi-Wan's characterization and the premise. I don't really like the actual execution much, and I'll go over that in a bit, so maybe this is a reach of a compliment, but I like the idea of him being hunted down by Inquisitors and seeing him escape while also grappling with this paranoia and PTSD that's developed as a result of what happened with Anakin. And I like the idea of him having this internal conflict of wanting to help and protect others, but also prioritizing his own secrecy and safety so that he can protect Luke and Leia. I also think an underutilized and interesting premise was him exploring the grimier and more underworld parts of the planets he visits, since he has to stay in the shadows. We see a bit of this when Obi-Wan goes to rescue Leia, but I feel like committing a bit more to that could have made for a cool backdrop or aspect to the story. But the strongest part of this show is Darth Vader, and it's not even close. I got way too much fucking enjoyment out of seeing Vader just casually snapping a kid's neck when he was looking for Obi-Wan. I'm probably fucked in the head, but it was so refreshing to see them show an evil person actually doing an evil thing. I was so used to seeing these shows be scared to kill anyone off, even if they're meaningless characters, or just show the bad guys doing anything to make me feel like, wow, this guy's fucked up. So yeah, him feeling a little nostalgic and killing a kid made me need an underwear change. What can I say? Obviously, there was more to Vader than just murdering a child, though. You can really feel how powerful and dangerous he is, and there was a pretty noticeable uptick in the action when he was on screen. From pulling down a ship, to trying to bury Obi-Wan alive, and then him fucking up Riva, just really great stuff. Again, I didn't really like that Riva survived, because I felt like Vader was the only one really creating any stakes or danger, because you know that he'll kill anybody without a second thought, and then having her survive detracted from that a little bit to me. But the strongest part of Vader's inclusion is the scenes between him and Obi Wan, and that's when the show and Obi Wan as a character are also at their best. Even though the use of the volume did make the scenes feel a bit claustrophobic, the first meeting between the two was pretty sick, with Vader lighting the ground on fire and throwing him in it, and it was also kind of hilarious how Obi Wan was just trying to run away the first couple times. Also, despite the world kind of looking like the inside of a gas station toilet that hasn't been flushed in months, the last battle between Obi-Wan and Vader is a lot of fun. And the part where Vader's mask breaks and Anakin's voice starts bleeding into when he talks while Obi-Wan looks emotionally wrecked, one of the best scenes of any of the shows, hands down.
Anakin. Anakin's gone. I am what remains.
Which is why it's extra disappointing that the show has so many problems, because had the rest have just been solid with these really high highs, they would have had a pretty damn good show on their hands. So what are the issues then? Well, for one, I think the show comfortably has the worst CGI. Again, it's not like all shit, but it was noticeable, and I felt like there were at least a few moments every episode where I looked at it and went, yeah, that didn't look great, or even, damn, that looked like ass. But the first significant issue I had was, again, the lack of a coherent or focused plot. It felt like they had these general notions of things they wanted to happen, but not really what to do with them or how to tie them all together. And what you end up getting is a bunch of adversities or moments where the plot hits a wall that get resolved by conveniences. Instead of a character getting somewhere because of their own competence or some interesting development, they just get thrown a life jacket. We want Reva to capture Leia. Well, let's have Leia sent out into the tunnel alone, and then have Reva find the secret entrance by her getting mad and knocking something over. We want to have some kind of conflict with Luke, since it's been 6 episodes, and we kind of forgot to include him, even though he's the whole reason Obi-Wan's still on Tatooine. Let's have Reva see a transmission from Leia's adopted dad, where he doxes Luke, and then have her crippled ass teleport there. And let's also have Obi-Wan just go, Luke, because of the Force and shit, and he also instantly teleports there. We want Obi-Wan and the gang to rescue Leia from the Imperial base. Let's have Tala get past security with the old, do you even know who I am trope, and then have them escape by Obi-Wan covering Leia with his cloak and some ships that come in at the last second to save them. I'm not gonna lie, the cloak thing made me laugh, but there were actually a bunch of times where just some straight up stupid shit happens. And a bunch of it was low-key hilarious. I remember seeing the first Leia chase scene on Twitter years ago and completely forgot that it was from this show. And when I saw it, I was dying. Laughing, but also on the inside. And did you notice how I said first there? Yeah, they have a fucking second chase scene where a bunch of adults can't catch a fucking child. And then you have other moments like the roof scene where Leia's getting shot at and running in the open, and then tries jumping a ridiculous gap, which I'm kinda surprised she didn't clear with how the show paints her, all while Reva's doing the most over-the-top parkour I've ever seen. But ultimately, the show's not trying to be openly campy, and these kinds of moments make the viewer take the story less seriously. Another significant issue that the show has is its dialogue. And I know that Star Wars is no stranger to bad dialogue, and maybe this is the show's way to pay homage to the prequels, but it really feels especially on the nose and suffocating. To be fair, there were some pretty good lines in here too, like Obi-Wan describing the Force to Leia.
Have you ever been afraid of the dark? How does it feel when you turn on the light?
I feel safe.
But for every moment like that, you have about 3 like this.
Everyone, I understand you're scared.
On-the-nose exposition is a pretty common problem in cinematic writing, and I'm sure everyone's heard show don't tell. But not only does the show tell, it tells like the audience is a bunch of lobotomites. Take the introduction of the Inquisitors. This scene is meant to establish one of the driving antagonistic forces in the show and convey that they're a capable threat. And by the way, they're literal Jedi hunters. Pretty cool in theory, right? Now how does the show handle this?
You know who we are.
Inquisitors.
You know what we do?
You hunt Jedi.
Not only is this a very uninteresting and rushed way of revealing who they are and their motivations, this is how you're setting the tone of these characters. If you look at the introductions of great villains in TV and movies, you're not going to really find someone who's just like, I'm a bad guy and I'm here to kill you. You're going to see the viewer's lack of knowledge be leveraged to either build tension or incite some reaction like shock. I didn't really feel anything watching this scene, and that's partly because it's more difficult to believably show someone's dangerous with words instead of action. It's not impossible, but you need some potent writing or performances then to make up the difference. And while the rest of the Grand Inquisitor's monologue isn't terrible, it's also not very special at all, and then the small tinkle of action where Riva throws the blade at the bar owner just isn't enough on its own either. So I'm left not caring any more about the Inquisitors after this than I did 5 minutes prior when I didn't even know they existed. They also use this on-the-nose exposition as practically their sole way to flesh out a character's feelings or motivations. For instance, at the start, a large focus of Obi Wan's characterization is that he's mentally defeated and has lost hope and the fight within him from what's happened at the end of the prequels and what's become of the galaxy since then. In concept, this is pretty good. But the way this is shown is Obi-Wan explicitly repeating how he's not the same man he used to be, and not the man you remember. You get the point across, sure, but there's no real depth or nuance there that would make a viewer sympathize with him, or even really just think about it at all. And honestly, the show does a pretty bad job at giving the audience an opportunity to think in general. It really feels like they were scared to include any moment of silence from dialogue and just let scenes breathe. Like during Tala's death scene, Obi-Wan just starts spamming, Tala! No! Tala! And it ends up just distracting from the moment. Or when Riva catches up to Obi-Wan and Leia after Obi-Wan rescues her for the first time, the scene doesn't even have a chance of building tension because Riva keeps doing these cartoonish taunts.
Obi-Wan, I can feel you.
And the last criticism I want to bring up before I move on is the underdevelopment and just poor allocation of the development for the main characters. Obi-Wan is supposed to be this super careful and paranoid guy who has managed to successfully stay in hiding for the past 10 years, and he's written like a complete moron. He takes zero precautions to hide his identity. He hasn't changed his appearance at all since the end of the prequels when the hunters know what he looks like. He wears obviously Jedi clothing that a fucking 10-year-old could notice and calls him out for. And then as he's walking onto a transport, just clearly flashes his lightsaber out in the middle of public. And when he gets stopped on the truck with Leia, he lets the droid fully scan his face before shooting it. Like, if you're gonna shoot the fucking droid anyways, why not just shoot it before he gets scanned and outed? Just overall, he's written to be so incompetent that it was hard for me to take him serious a lot of the time. And then you got Leia. What I'll say is the actress was pretty good. You know, I mean, she was like 10 years old when the show came out, and I didn't hate her performance. I just didn't like the direction they took with that character. This is what I meant by poor allocation of development. So much of her time on screen is the show trying to make her look like a badass. I'm all for suspending some disbelief, but making her repeatedly outrun adults and having her be the most competent character on screen on multiple occasions is just, you know, it's not even earned. She's not wielding the Force, she's not wildly athletic or a super genius with some crazy training. She's just a fucking kid. Yeah, she's smart, but still. If they had maybe toned down all the crazy shit they were trying to have her do, and instead focused on her being smart and capable with the context of her being a 10-year-old child, that would have benefited the character a lot. Lastly, you got Riva. Yeah, I wasn't in love with the performance and how over the top it often was, but at the end of the day, her being unhinged could have worked if she was written better. I like the idea of Riva much more than I liked Riva herself. An Inquisitor who's secretly motivated by her desire to kill Vader to the point where she'll do anything it takes to get to the top and get close to him is good on paper. And adding in the fold of her surviving Order 66 by playing dead and then being looked down upon by the other Inquisitors was also interesting. But they did like none of the groundwork needed for this plot point to hit. Yeah, the intro scene of the show is Order 66, where we supposedly see her, but they do no real development or gradual building of her motivation. We just get this kind of rushed and poorly placed scene of her explaining her motivations to Obi Wan before they raided the hangar. And because of this, she didn't feel too compelling, and it made her surviving a gut stab and teleporting to Tatooine to have some kind of rounding to her arc even more unnecessary. If you're not going to properly show the first part of the arc, why the fuck would I care to see the end of it? But yeah, that's probably more than enough about this show. Again, not terrible, just really held down by some fundamental storytelling issues. Again, a couple of disclaimers for Ahsoka. I haven't seen Rebels or Clone Wars, and at the time of recording, only Season 1 has been released. So if the animated series make this a significantly better watch somehow, or Season 2 ends up being amazing, that's great, but on its own, Season 1 is just very middle of the road. As is mostly the case with Star Wars projects, I thought the design was a strength. I didn't love some of the character design like the witches, but generally, I liked it. I think they did a great job with Ahsoka, and I also thought the Night Inquisitor dude looked sick, even though he was pretty useless and got bitched doing one of the worst attacks I've ever seen.
Bro, that's fucked up what they be doing to y'all. I ain't even gonna hold you, bro. I be saying that's fucked up, like, bro.
The worlds they show were also really cool and pretty unique, and overall, I thought the show looked good to great, with some very minor moments where it looked kind of buns. Also, Hayden Christensen is fucking awesome and probably the highlight of the show, even if his inclusion was a bit fanservice-y and kind of unnecessary for the plot. The lightsaber battle between him and Ahsoka was also a bit thrown in there, but fun, and cheat code or not, the flashing between him and Vader was a really cool visual. I just don't like over-reliance on fan service and think it should be more of a cherry on top that makes sense in the story, rather than something that's one of the show's biggest draws. But if you're gonna do it anyway, I'm glad they made it fun at least. Maybe this is an unpopular opinion since I know a lot of people find the beginning to be boring, but I thought the first half of the show was actually better than the second. Yeah, it definitely wasn't the most captivating start, but I thought the beginning felt a bit more coherent at least, and the foundation of the ideas they were trying to show I thought was okay. It's just the execution of these ideas let them down, and so when there's no payoff to what you're trying to build or set the stage for, they're just going to seem worse and more pointless in hindsight. Ahsoka having Sabine as an apprentice could have made for an interesting dynamic. You have Ahsoka, who has a bit of a warped perspective on the Master and Padawan relationship because of what happened with Anakin, and then you have Sabine, who's very naturally talented in some respects because of her Mandalorian descendants, but is also headstrong and impatient. But we don't see how Ahsoka's own experiences as Anakin's Padawan really shaped how she acts as a master. And in general, there's no interesting exploration or development in her and Sabine's relationship. All we get there instead is one of them talking to a third party like Hera or Huyang and complaining how the other is difficult to work with and doesn't seem like they want to work with her, while Hera or Huyang or whoever goes, "Hey, you should probably go talk to her." And the amount of time someone tells one of them, "You two need to stick together," started bringing me physical pain. And guess what? They basically never stuck together, and never had any meaningful interactions to deal with this conflict. It would have been much better had we seen the two of them actually resolve it gradually between themselves, than just hearing the same baseline ideas get repeated over and over to other people, and having them just be cool at the end. I also thought the idea of how there are people everywhere, including the New Republic government, who are still on the Imperial side and are trying to cover up what's happening, could have been interesting. But they don't really push the idea anywhere past its fetal stage. No one actually listens to Hera saying Thrawn might be alive for whatever reason. They just keep repeating, "Nope, that's impossible." No one questions why the one Senate dude is so adamant about not letting Hera investigate it. And then worst of all, fucking C-3PO randomly comes in with the most convenient and dumbest bailout when Hera was gonna have to deal with some consequences for basically going rogue. And there are other ideas that I thought had the potential to be more interesting, like the conflict between potentially sacrificing Ezra for good or making it possible for Thrawn to return, and even how there's a fabled planet with witches who can use ancient force techniques. I'll circle back to my issues with the executions of these ideas, but the point is, you can make the most interesting premise in the world feel flat and boring if you don't develop it properly. Ideas are cheap, but execution is expensive. As for some more minor complaints, for one, the plot is low-key just a bunch of fetch quests. Go find the big Quidditch ball that's also a map. Go find the planet Thrawn and Ezra are on. Go find Thrawn and Ezra on that planet. You also have a bunch of dumb moments like Ezra walking out in a full stormtrooper fit for no reason and not getting shot. You know, you'd think they'd be on high alert after literally getting infiltrated at the start of the show, but whatever, I guess. And we know that that's Ezra, so not sure why they were trying to make it a reveal at all. Anyway, another complaint is that the action's pretty weak. You have some good moments and fights in there, like at the beginning when Ahsoka finds the map, the fight with Anakin, and the first fight between Ahsoka and Baylan after they stopped circling each other for way too long. But overall, just nothing too fun or creative. Then you also have the lack of stakes that characters face, which again made a lot of things feel less important. There are smaller examples like how none of the hermit crab fuckers died at the end when they only had slingshots and little shell vehicles, or when Sabine also gets stabbed by a lightsaber and is fully chilling. Genuinely, my main takeaway from all these shows was Qui-Gon must have been bitch-made or had some kind of autoimmune disease or something, because Sabine's like fully ready to go and healed after a 10-minute nap in a hospital bed. But the most egregious example of not having stakes is the fact that Sabine didn't have to deal with any consequences for not destroying the map when she could have, and risking countless lives for the off chance that Ezra was alive. And yeah, he was alive, but the show gives us no reason to think it's an actual real or believable possibility. And even then, she only gets there because she trusts the enemy for no reason. Beyond me how she trusted these people and then had the gall to be like,
Hey! We had a deal!
Dumb bitch.
I get it wasn't a rational decision and she did it out of love and friendship, and that's valid. But on a higher level, that was a really selfish and stupid decision, and not one person calls her out on it. They all just go, yep, it's okay. We don't even see her grapple with the choice at all. Fine if she backs it and is willing to live with it. But again, by all accounts of what the show is saying, Thrawn equals another war. And so she really is directly responsible for starting another war. Regardless of what she felt was the right choice, there should have been some kind of self-reflection there, or just any sort of conflict that highlights the weight of that decision. You would hope that this is explored a bit better in the second season, because man, that was such a lackluster and disappointing way to deal with probably the most compelling opportunity for conflict in the whole show. My biggest gripe with Ahsoka, though, is with the characters, because at its core, the show is character-driven. There's not these crazy action set pieces or twists and turns in the plot. The story hinges on its characters and the audience caring about them. Now, this is an aspect of the show that I do think watching Rebels and Clone Wars would help with, but on its own, this season didn't do a great job at developing the characters in intriguing ways. Partly because of their characterizations, but also because of the lack of follow-through on certain plot lines and ideas. Some of the characters like Hera, Huyang, and Shin were fine to me. I didn't like some of Shin's dialogue.
And isn't it our turn now? Won't our alliance with Thrawn finally bring us into power?
And I thought Hera's plot wasn't very good, but the characters were fine. Quick tangent, but my god, Hera did not seem like a good mother here. Why the fuck would you bring your kid to all these potentially dangerous missions, man? Like, seriously, what the fuck? How is this tripod of a droid gonna do shit to protect your kid if a Sith comes after him? Like, someone please call Child Protective Services, Jesus. But anyway, Ahsoka's not terrible, and she has some good moments.
Sometimes even the right reasons have the wrong consequences.
But I didn't care much about her because being stoic can't be your only personality trait. And then Sabine is written like a complete idiot. I've already kind of talked about it, but she's supposed to be a smart character from what I can tell, and she just does not act that way at all. Also, her learning how to use the Force was really rushed. Like, you can't show her struggling to move a can, and then at the end she can help Force push Ezra onto a moving ship like that, just because it's important. And Ezra really doesn't have a personality either, and is also kind of just written like an idiot. I mentioned the stormtrooper thing at the end, but why would he not push Sabine to tell him how she got there when she was acting so sketchy about it? Yeah, I know she said, let's just be happy for a moment or whatever, but that could have been a good opportunity to show some of his personality, because what she did basically undid his sacrifice and made it all for nothing. And if they really are that close in the first place, he should have been able to tell that something was off. The least compelling of the characters, though, were definitely the antagonists, and in my opinion, this show has the worst antagonistic force of any of the shows. I even thought the short moments of Cad Bane in Book of Boba Fett were more interesting than what they did here with Thrawn, Balin, and the witches. First of all, I think Lady Morgan was pretty fun in the action sequences she gets, but my god was she such a piece of cardboard. Not once did I care about anything related to her, and I don't know what it was, but that fucking smirk she has on her face the whole time irritated the shit out of me. Like, what are you smiling about? Tell me, please. I really would have loved a reason to smile while watching this. And then the witches in general were just not that interesting. I mean, the first scene of them on Peridia was pretty ass, from the echoing of the Great Mother's voice to the overall uninspired dialogue here. And then the one thing they do which is hyped up like some crazy move is raising the dead and making some zombie troopers, which I guess is cool in theory, but it doesn't end up changing or doing anything other than giving the troopers one more chance to get killed by the heroes. Then you got Balin. What did that dude want? I get they're trying to be secretive and save this for some future reveal, but there was just too much vagueness surrounding his motivations and the things that shaped his past. It was just hard for me to get fully invested in him. They tried giving him some bars here and there.
Impatience for victory will guarantee defeat.
But they're just kind of thrown in there without any interesting surrounding context or dialogue. But yeah, I don't know. Just wasn't really fleshed out enough for me to care. And then you got Thrawn. You spend over half the show hyping this character up as some galaxy-changing figure who can change the tide of history, and when we finally see him, it's really nothing special or different. Again, you can't just tell us over and over how he's a war genius and super important, and have that be enough for us to believe it for the rest of the show. The audience never gets a full understanding or a convincing explanation for why Thrawn returning is so important, and why he's so special. Sure, he escapes in the end, but he doesn't really make any genuinely smart decisions or moves on the way that cause the heroes any issues, and if anything, he kinda sucks. He keeps saying how he knows exactly what Ahsoka's gonna do because he knows her master, which doesn't even make that much sense, but then he doesn't do anything specifically tailored to Ahsoka being the enemy. His first move is putting out a minefield that fucks up the Star Whales when Ahsoka comes in, and she goes, "It's Thrawn." But, like, what was so genius about that she was sure it was Thrawn? I feel like it was a pretty standard play to do that, considering the whales were her only chance to get there, and it didn't really do shit to stop Ahsoka. In general, every move he makes doesn't really do shit to stop anyone, but he just goes, yes, exactly how I drew it up. You fell right into my trap. By the way, if he's so fucking smart and has the witches that are capable of sending messages across the galaxy and raising the dead, how the fuck could he not find Ezra? This motherfucker was not even that hidden. He was just in the middle of the open at the crab people's camp, and Sabine found him like instantly. They give some half-ass explanation of how they can't stay in one place too long, but are you for real that they never thought to check there? Also, exceptional plan to not just kill Sabine, but let her go find Ezra so you can kill them both, when you're literally planning on leaving the planet and stranding him there anyways. And maybe this would feel like less of an issue if his personality wasn't entirely just, he's smart. And if you're really married to having these characters embody just one personality trait or idea, then push it further. Make it believable and explore how this affects their interactions. Don't just have them be squares and circles on a blank canvas and tell us it's art. Yeah, again, we'll see where they take this show, but hopefully it can have some more cohesive and creative writing, because I do think there's still some potential here. What many have called the show that killed Star Wars, and what the showrunner called a cross between Frozen and Kill Bill, The Acolyte has definitely become the most controversial Star Wars project yet. What I will say is, though I'd probably agree that it's the worst show of the bunch because of how messy it is, I found it more entertaining than the Book of Boba Fett, and it had some pretty solid highs and ideas. Admittedly, that might be on the level of praising a baby for shitting itself, but I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people have been saying. Again, not good, and definitely the most flawed show, but I think the extra harshness and backlash that this one got was because of all the built-up resentment. At the end of the day, if you keep releasing these subpar or mid projects, which seem to be repeatedly failing in the same categories, people will and did get fed up. Shit in my soup once, shame on you. Do it 5 times and we got a problem. But like I said, the show's not a complete dumpster fire. For one, it genuinely had some of the most entertaining action in any of the shows. I liked the sequence of the Jedi Wookiee Kelnaka being mind-controlled and fucking up Torben's face. I thought the fight between Osha and May was fun and looked really good considering it was the same person fighting herself. And most of all, anytime Kamira was involved in an action scene, it was electric. The ferocity and unconventionality he fought with was really sick, and I love how cold-blooded they made him. Not that I cared about any of the characters that much, but the fact that they let him murder Yord and the visual chlamydia that was Jeki like that was great. Like I mentioned with Vader and Obi Wan, I love when they let the antagonists do fucked up things. And just generally, I really loved the design and energy of Kamir. His characterization definitely has issues, which I'll mention in a bit, but he was easily one of my favorite antagonists I saw in the shows. In general, I think the performances were actually pretty good in spite of the writing. Amanda Stenberg did a solid job with Osha and May and made them distinguishable, which was nice. Jodie Turner-Smith did great for what she had to work with for Mother and Isaiah, and then even though she was killed in literally the first scene, Carrie-Anne Moss did a good job as Indara as well. There were some other moments and minor things I enjoyed, like the little beaver tracker Basil. The way he literally couldn't do anything except follow the person he's tracking and would go across the galaxy to do it was dumb, but it got a couple giggles out of me, I'll admit it. I know the bit got played out too much, but I still kind of liked it and thought that honestly made it a little funnier too. Also, I feel like I've said this for almost every show, but on paper I like the ideas, and I genuinely feel that this show arguably had the most intriguing premise and highest ceiling if the executions were good. A Sith apprentice going around killing Jedi, and then showing another side of the Jedi where yes, some of them are moral and capable heroes, but some of them are also self-preserving and arrogant. And showing how the latter kind, thinking they know what's best, leads to a disaster is actually a pretty compelling narrative. And then seeing Osha progressively learn this, grapple with her emotions, and eventually become disillusioned and turn to the dark side also had the potential of being strong. There legitimately was a really good show in here somewhere, but it was just let down so much by the messy execution and the poor, rushed writing. Like, man, this show has so many stupid moments. I'm just gonna quickfire a few that stood out to me. Right before May starts attacking Indara and Torben, we get this slap of cringe.
We have unfinished business. Attack me with all your strength.
I'm sure you've seen this next one, but I don't even know what to say. Like, it's genuinely shocking to me that this found its way into the final draft of the show.
Power of one, the power of two, the power of many.
Brother,
Osha survives a ship falling from the atmosphere and crashing into the ground because she wore a seatbelt and covered her head. The witch's castle is made from stone, but burns down as if it was made from fucking gasoline. And I get it came from some magical tome book or something, but that's just dumb, man. Speaking of the witches, it took all of them sitting around swaying to mind control Kelnaka, and then when the spell is broken, they all just kind of fall over and die. Like, what the fuck is that? There's more, and I'll touch on some of it, but yeah, some of it just really feels like they didn't know what to do and didn't have time to figure it out in a smart way, so they just kind of did the first suggestion that was brought up. In fact, rushed is the perfect word to describe a lot of the dialogue, scenes, and plot lines in general. If you watch this show, the conversations frequently feel like less of a real interaction and more like one character waiting for the first millisecond when the other finishes their line so they can jump in.
You care about May. You mourn the years lost between the two of you.
Someone must find May before she does any more harm.
The dialogue is also rushed in the sense that it feels like they cut out or skipped so much of the connecting dialogue that communicates how a character or conversation gets to a certain point. For instance, when Sol, Yord, and Jeki go to find Osha on the snowy planet, Sol says how he can't believe it's May behind the killing since he saw her die with his own eyes. Then 5 seconds later, when they catch up to Osha, all it takes is Osha saying, May is alive, and Sol is all of a sudden like, I believe you. What the fuck do you mean you believe her? Is that really all it took to convince you it wasn't her? On top of the rush dialogue and there being some scenes that are so quick and edited down they gave my ass whiplash, they also rushed most of the plot lines and aspects of the show that deserved more time. The first thing that comes to mind with this is the killings of the 4 Jedi. I've never been a fan of shows and movies making what should be powerful people completely incompetent or having them get steamrolled just for plot simplicity. And with how the Acolyte treats the Jedi, I'd have a tough time picking between them and a toddler with no legs in a fight. And that's not to say that they were just terrible at fighting. Again, I liked the action in the show, and when they did fight, it was good. But the problem is, we barely saw them fight, and they got killed so easily that I didn't think a single one of those kills was really earned. The only one I'm kind of okay with is the Indara one, because at least they spent some time on that fight sequence. I don't really like that all it took was a bit of made you look to kill her, and that Indara is just dead now, literally after the first scene, but not terrible. Then you go to Torben though, and at first I was intrigued because he had the whole force field thing going on, and I was like, okay, how is May gonna find a way around this? Well, it turns out that this man was in serious need of a hotline because all it took was May coming with some poison and being like, drink this or tell the Jedi Council. The words were barely out of her mouth, and boom, he's slamming the poison back. It was low-key funny how fast that transpired, but that was such a stupid and cop-out way to kill him, especially because we just met the character, so him making this choice holds zero weight. And then that's not even the worst one. You got my man Kelnaka. I remember before the show came out, people were hyped for a Jedi Wookiee, and yeah, I like some Chewbacca. Add a bit of force to him, and I'm game. I'm almost not exaggerating when I say that we got to see more time of him cooking than we did of him fighting. We get these 2 throwaway establishing scenes of him where he uses the force for half a second and then meal preps. And when May goes in for their fight, he's already dead. Kimir killed him. Awesome. I know we see a bit of actual fighting for him later, but man, what a disappointment. The Kimir battle after this was probably my favorite sequence of the show, but why did it have to be one or the other? There was a bunch of other stuff I would have liked to have seen cut out, so I can see some fucking Jedi Wookiee action. Lastly, Sol at least put up a fight, but Osha force choking him to death didn't feel earned either, because that and just Osha's turning to the dark side in general was also super rushed. Even though her flipping makes sense from a general perspective and it led to the really cool visual of the lightsaber turning red, the progression of it was essentially non-existent. They only spent some time on it in episodes 6 and 8, and you don't see her have any sort of internal conflict with it, and she also goes from being pretty useless with the Force to all of a sudden being able to force choke just because she's mad. Then you have a bunch of other examples of plot points or just other things thrown in there, like Darth Plagueis being in a cave for no reason, and then the 2-second cameo of the back of Yoda's head, which feel rushed, pointless, and honestly borderline offensive. Similarly to what we saw in the other shows, a good chunk of the blame for why it all ends up feeling rushed is because they lost narrative focus and spent a significant amount of time on unnecessary or redundant things. Why did we spend 2 whole episodes on the backstory when so much of the second episode was just re-showing the same shit we've already seen with a slightly different point of view that ends up changing like nothing fundamentally? Those 2 for sure should have been condensed into 1 episode, which would have opened up a lot of time to make necessary developments. Why didn't the season end when Osha's lightsaber changed colors? That actually would have been a pretty solid end, all things considering, especially when none of what happened after was interesting. You just fully halt the momentum of that moment, so what? The Jedi can search around and Venestra can say, "You," about Kimir, or so they can randomly wipe May's memory? That was also such a rushed plot point and just dumb. Like, how did Osha think that making her forget was gonna make it so May could live free all of a sudden? She's still a murderer. And now we're back in the same place we started, with one of them being confused and the other being a Sith apprentice. Anyway, speaking of Vernestra, what an absolutely useless plotline and character. The whip saber was cool, I guess, and I like that the Senate dude who came in and started calling her out and the Jedi for their bullshit, but other than that, she does nothing but waste time and make vague comments about how there's more at play. I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but all this feels even worse when you have main characters with scattered motivations that act like they have the most aggressive CTE ever seen. You spend half the show showing how determined May is to kill the Jedi, and then out of nowhere she traps Kamir and goes, "My loyalty is to Osha, not your master." What? You've been serving this dude for presumably years, and from everything we've seen, you don't even fuck with your sister. You were gonna burn her alive to keep her from being happy, and then literally at the end of the next episode, you just left her to die on that planet so you could go back to trying to kill Saul. And even with a character like Kamir, who I liked, he just seems like a confused dumbass. His obsession with having a student and having that student kill without a weapon makes no sense and borders on some kind of obscure sexual deviancy. And yes, it's all to set up Osha joining him and then force choking, but that doesn't make it make sense. And he tries to convince Osha how the Jedi aren't good people and how they quote-unquote threaten his existence, but he doesn't give any good examples and just kind of says, "They don't let me do whatever I want." And he also wants the power of two, I guess. Just such brain-dead motivations for an otherwise really fun character. But man oh man, these other characters all seem like Nobel Prize winners when compared to Saul. This man has such intense dumbassery, it's unbelievable. To be clear, I don't think it's Lee Jung-jae's fault. He wasn't standout, but he had good moments and I think he's a good actor. But his purpose in this show is mostly just to look around like he smelled someone rip ass. He constantly repeats the same 4.5 ideas. You can convince him of anything by just saying it. And I can't stress this enough, is just so stupid. They interrogate Kamir and hear him make a confession of being involved with killing Torben, but Saul says they'll let him off with a warning if he cooperates, and just believes everything he says even though he's clearly lying. He can't tell May swapped with Osha at first, even though Kamir could tell instantly, and then all of a sudden he randomly recognized her and acts like he knew the whole time. He was so obsessed with training Osha and taking her away, and was really the reason so many people died, and the whole time he knew she wouldn't be a Jedi, so what the fuck? Then he constantly flips from being regretful and wanting to take trial or take accountability, but then never takes accountability and just keeps spamming how he was in the right. But what's crazy about this is a character like this could have worked. A stupid Jedi who's overconfident in his abilities and beliefs and acts as though he's a great person, but is really just a narcissist who won't take responsibilities for his mistakes. It doesn't really work here because you need better surrounding pieces and dynamics, and also I don't believe for a second that this was the intentional direction of this character. But yeah, just a really muddled and not great show. The last show before I get to Andor is the newest and probably least talked about show, Skeleton Crew. I'm gonna say it right off the bat, it's pretty good. I think it's overall the strongest season outside of Andor and the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian. Again, you be the judge of how much that means to you, but it's fun. There were a bunch of scenes and moments that I had a legitimately good time watching. Them escaping the pirate shipport planet and accidentally fucking everyone up with the fuel line they got stuck on. Nice. The pirates chasing them to the spa planet and blowing up the welcoming ships. Also nice.
Welcome to Lanupa, a neutral planet where all are welcome if they keep the...
This is easily one of the better looking shows too. There's a lot of really great looking scenes, and I like the character design, especially with the werewolf dude Brutus. Not sure why they're so thirsty to underuse every cool looking character, but still. The worlds were different from what we've normally been seeing and were also really well done. Just overall was visually a good time. To be clear, I didn't necessarily love it and it didn't do anything that special, which I get still falls into the overall Star Wars criticism of having such a creative property with all the funding in the world and making underwhelming to solid shows, but at least this one was genuinely charming and did a pretty good job at what it was aiming for. And to be fair, there definitely was some creativity too. Like, I thought it was clever having their planet become a folk legend in the galaxy for being a planet of endless treasure because it was an Old Republic mint that was purposefully hidden. They also captured that sort of childlike wonder and imagination of escaping home and going on an adventure effectively. And yeah, it wears its inspiration from the Goonies on its sleeve, but when you actually put some effort in and put your own spin on it, it's not too big of an issue in my opinion. The characters' performances and dialogue were also surprisingly good, and it was cast really well. I thought Jude Law did a great job with his character Jod, making him this charming but ultimately untrustworthy and greedy dude. And his motivations were a little muddled in the end, but that also kind of worked with how the character was written. On one hand, he cares about money more than anything and betrayed the kids the moment he got a chance, but on the other hand, it seemed like he did care about them at least a little, and when it was time to actually pull the trigger when people kept fucking up his plans, he didn't. In the other shows, I'd probably call this out as incompetence on his end out of convenience for the plot, and maybe it was, but here they showed enough personality from him for it to also be believable that he really did care about the kids more than he was letting on. I also really liked the scene where he was calling all the kids out for being annoying fucks.
Your incessant, unending jabber, 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 honestly, it is unbearable.
And the other characters were generally pretty good too. The senile pirate droid SM-33 was a good time, and I thought Fern was probably the strongest of the kids. You know, she had an emotional beat of her crumbling under putting on a strong face, and it actually felt like a moment. And in general, the main cast portray their characters well and have them feel like actual people and kids, and not just talking pieces of cardboard. And I liked most of the convos between the main characters, which is something I haven't been able to say much while watching these other shows. To be fair, the parents were more on the mediocre side.
We can't transmit any coordinates due to security procedures, but you can get home.
But I do like how they wrote them trying to do something to get their kids back home, even if it was useless. Like the scene where they try and get the communicator away from the robot guards and they keep passing it on as they get dropped by the stun guns was good. Even the humor, though it definitely didn't always land, got some genuine smiles out of me.
Oh. Oh dear.
They did rinse and repeat the bit where they build something up like it's going to be an epic moment and then have it turn out to be a failure, but they did it differently enough each time so it didn't feel like you were getting your skull caved in by it at least. And while I have the least amount of complaints or criticisms about this show, there's a few that I think stopped it from being a great show instead of just a good one. Firstly, the 2 episodes that were on the At-Aten War Edition planet and the trash area of the Spa planet were pretty much both filler episodes where the main focus were these pretty half-hearted attempts at showing some themes or messages. In the episode on At Akron, we get Elephant Boy Neil repeating the superbly beautiful message of "War is bad. Why are you guys even fighting? You should just stop." And I get you're trying to show how the main kids never saw a war on their planet and Neil's just a blissfully ignorant child, but they really didn't do anything interesting with the idea at all, and it got a bit annoying when Neil kept repeating the same thing over and over. Again, I get he's a kid, but I also think having a character be a kid isn't an excuse for poor writing. Then you have the Spa Planet's dump episode where KB somewhat randomly gets pissed at Fern and the 4 of them split up. And basically the reason KB gets pissed is because Fern always treats her like she can do whatever she can and is fully equal. But she's not, and she's different. I get what they're trying to show here, that being considerate to someone with some kind of disability or ailment doesn't just mean completely pretending it doesn't exist, and you should still be mindful in certain situations, but they again didn't really show this very well. I mean, maybe they did this and I forgot about it and you can correct me in the comments, but it would have probably helped this moment feel more real if we saw, for example, KB try and bring this up earlier and Fern responding by encouraging her or hyping her up instead of actually listening. And this would have made it more understandable when Wim asks why not just tell her and she goes,
"I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because she doesn't have patience for that."
My point is, when the show goes through these moments, it just doesn't have the follow through needed to actually make them worthwhile, and I would have much rather just seen them focus on being fun for those 2 episodes instead. Not sure if this is a paradoxical or a complimentary criticism to what I just said, but there also just wasn't much depth to the characters. There were some moments with Jod where you can see the bond he built with the kids crack a bit of his greed and self-centeredness, but it's not fleshed out much, and then his backstory was standard and poorly timed, so didn't really care much about that. I thought Wim's curiosity and imagination was a pretty solid fold of his personality that they showed, and again Fern had a couple of strong moments, but yeah, it was pretty run-of-the-mill and surface-level stuff. To be fair, not sure who was walking into Star Wars Skeleton Crew expecting some super deep and touching narrative though. So I'm kinda just being a critical bitch right now, but whatever. My last real issue with the show is that there were just some moments and aspects of the plot that didn't really feel very well thought out or developed. They find the coordinates back home almost instantly, even though it's been hidden from almost everyone for ages because of a symbol that the owl character sees. The kid's genius plan to escape from Jod when he turned on them in the old pirate's treasure trove was to send themselves down into a booby-trapped hatch when they saw how the whole place was covered in deadly traps. Now, of course, it's meant for younger audiences, so the hatch conveniently led them outside instead of skewering them on a bunch of spikes, but yeah, that probably could have been a bit more thought out because that was a dumb way to escape. And then also, the supervisor of their planet being a computer was pretty stupid. Like, I get they were already protected from a planetary perspective, but you would think that the Empire, who had limitless money, would have installed a bit of a better defense mechanism for the thing running such a valuable planet than some shitty slow droids. And then it gets instantly murked when Jod stabs the eye. Hal would be ashamed. Overall though, while I'm not the target demographic and won't be shitting myself out of excitement for season 2, I thought it was a really solid show and appreciate that you can feel the effort they put in. Okay, it's finally time for me to get to the main point of this video, and that's glazing Andor. And maybe I'm blinded by the glaze, but the show has a completely different feel from the rest of them off the bat. I mean, even the fucking title card has aura, man. And while The Mandalorian started comparatively strong, Andor doesn't ever feel like it loses focus. It sets the tone immediately with the opening of Cassian getting harassed and robbed by a couple of drunk piece of shit guards, and then accidentally killing one of them. And while this premise for an intro isn't unbelievable on its own, the way in which it's written and performed makes you feel the weight of Cassian's realization that he just killed an Imperial employee and is gonna have to kill the other as well, while he's desperately groveling for his life. Phenomenal start, and the show just keeps building from there. One of the biggest complaints about Andor that I've seen is that it's too slow and the first half kind of drags on a bit, but I couldn't disagree more. Don't get me wrong, the show takes it to another level once it hits episode 6, but part of the reason the rest of the show works so well is because they took the time building plotlines and characters through actual storytelling and not shortcuts. The biggest overarching issue I saw in these shows was how rushed their narratives were, so I'm glad that they erred on the side of taking their time here, as opposed to maybe being a bit more concise and cutting valuable development. And before I get to more specific examples, I also want to say the show looks stunning, and the scenes and set pieces they create are oozing with deliberation. Even though a location like Ferrix seems Tatooine adjacent at first, it actually has quite a lot of personality. For instance, sound is incorporated as a vital part of the environment, with the bell tower guy, who I definitely try to shoot on a Saturday morning, and then all the locals banging on metal when Imperial forces are around. Speaking of locals, we see so many compelling and realistic characters here that it feels full of life. And this is further underlined by the culture we see during Marva's funeral, as they prepare to place Marva's brickified ashes into the wall of the city as is custom, while a marching band plays this somber progression and the whole city is attending. It's also a great detail to have this planet be a sort of ship scrapyard, because it gives an organic explanation for how Bix and Cassian ended up in contact with Luthen in the first place. And I'm a whore for mountains, so I already liked Aldhani from the beginning, but then you add in the Comet Show of the Eye and the native inhabitants doing their celebration of the event. Now, I'm not going to act like I thought the celebration was a highlight of the show, but it does make the world feel a bit more alive, and there was actually thought put into it where it feels somewhat like a real ritual of real natives. This is what the power of many scene should have looked like. And I could go on with Coruscant and the resort planet that Cassian goes to, but the point is, the world building here is incredible. The action sequences are equally as visually grabbing and well thought out. My personal favorite was Luthen escaping in a ship from the Imperial ship with the tractor beam. The needle missiles he shoots back and the spinning lasers. Like, come on. Stop it before I get too excited, seriously.
Stop it! It's turning me on! Stop!
Obviously, the prison escape and the heist were also fantastic, and I'll talk about them more, but I think a perfect example of the show's creativity is the sequence of Cassian and Luthen escaping from Ferrix. And the reason I say this is because this could have easily have just been a straightforward shootout with them running away unconvincingly, which is something we saw multiple times in the other shows. But instead, it has this sense of chaos because of all these little details coming together which make it work so well. You have all the chains and heavy equipment flying around the warehouse as Cassian and Luthen try to get out, all while Cassian is trying to go back for the box. You have the one Imperial ship that Brasso tied down crashing and exploding in the distance, which causes the Imperials to freak out. You again have the metal banging from the locals, followed by the silence, and you have Cyril going around shitting himself, realizing he was in way over his head. I also love that when they get out of the warehouse and Cassian stops and is like, "What about the box?" he instantly gets shot at. Because fucking time and place, man. Such a pet peeve of mine when characters stand out in the open during a gunfight so they can have a little conversation. Anyway, instead of some momentum being halted from that awesome first interaction between Cassian and Luthen by a lackluster cookie-cutter escape shootout scene, this all ends up building even more momentum and setting the foundation for future dynamics. And that's an aspect of Andor's writing that I loved so much. The way that the story continuously builds on itself by interweaving and developing different plot lines and dynamics into a cohesive and captivating narrative. Take Cassian's story. This dude wants to chill, mind his own business, and find his sister. And even though he originally wants no part of the rebellion, he progressively gets pulled into it from external circumstances. It was such a great narrative decision to have him get away with killing those 2 Imperial guards and then get away with the Aldhani heist as one of only 3 survivors, all to just get thrown into a labor prison with a 6-year sentence for being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Hang on to this one for me. I want to check the shelter.
He said hang.
No.
It's amazingly fucked up, but it's also a perfect wake-up call for Cassian. His hatred of the Empire is always there, but at first he refuses to join the rebellion because he feels it's futile and doesn't want to give up his life for what he sees as nothing. He even tells Luthen exactly this.
I think it's all useless. Better to spit on their food and steal their trinkets. It's better to leave.
But seeing how the Empire indiscriminately discards and enslaves people just because they can, pushes Cassian to join the cause. And the reason it feels so earned is because the show doesn't just spell it out to the viewer like we have 3 brain cells. We actively see him come to the realization. One of my favorite small details in the show is how Cassian has no issues sleeping before the Aldhani heist, but is wide awake before the prison escape. They were both extremely dangerous, but while Aldhani was just a job to him, the prison escape is when it became real to him that he was fighting for more than himself. And we see that despite him being somewhat self-serving and motivated by money, he really does care about others. You see it in how he interacts with his friends on Ferrix. You see it when it's not even a question to him whether to take Nemec to a doctor or let him die. And you see it when he goes in to save Bix at the end. He does get pushed to where he ends up at the end of Season 1, but the fight and being a rebel has always been a part of him too. And seeing this be shown through the little things, like him waiting till the last second to get off the electrocuting floors in the prison, and the parallels between him leaving in the ship with Marva as a kid and leaving Ferrix in Luthen's ship just made it such a satisfying character arc. And look, I know that some people don't love Diego Luna's performance, and admittedly there are some questionable deliveries.
Nobody's listening. Nobody's listening!
But for every underwhelming moment, he also has a pretty great one.
They just killed 100 men to keep them quiet. What would you call that? I'd call that power. Power doesn't panic.
And that's just one of the storylines. Granted, he's the protagonist, so his is the most fleshed out, but I genuinely thought all the plot lines were compelling and naturally fit into the bigger picture. The rebellion organizing and the Empire slowly picking up on it and retaliating as the galaxy progresses to war. A Star War. Yeah, I know, I'm a piece of shit for that. You can leave a dislike, it's okay. But you know what isn't a piece of shit? That motherfucking prison plotline. If for nothing else, this makes the show a must-watch. Genuinely, everything about it was perfection. The design and the concept of the prison, excellent. I mean, it's Alcatraz with electrocuting floors and basically slave labor that's gamified into a competition between the different tables and floors. The first electrocution was a tiny bit goofy and reminded me of that one Speed gif, but the goofiness disappeared really quick when one of the inmates offs himself by stepping on the floor, and we learn his body's just gonna be cooking overnight. And I think it was really clever using this mechanic as the main prison defense, because it reflects this idea that Cassian talks about of the Empire growing complacent and not caring or needing to put guards there, and gave a natural way for the prison escape to be realistic. Speaking of the prison escape, so good, man. Cassian breaking the pipe so water spills out and short circuits the floor, the actual moment the prisoners and guards realize the floor is disabled, and then one way out, baby.
We are being transferred to some other prison to go and die. There is one way out.
All of this plus the plot point of them communicating with another floor through sign language and learning that a whole floor was wiped out because they learned that released prisoners were being sent back into a different spot. Just all fantastic stuff. The new prisoner characters we meet are also great. Like, rest in peace Olaf, man. His body probably would have disintegrated if he tried jumping off the prison into the water at the end anyway, but man, it was sad. Seeing him struggle while they built the parts, but still wanting to win, and then being the closest to finishing his sentence only to have a stroke and get put down like a dog, was not very cash money to say the least. And yes, we learned it wouldn't have mattered even if he had finished his sentence, but he didn't know that. Then you got Kino Man. Andy Serkis really came in there and made a smaller role into arguably the most memorable character of any of the shows. I can't overstate how good the performance was and how well written the character was, really. He starts as this no bullshit shift manager who really believes that being on good behavior and getting everyone to do their job well will get him released. And he's so determined that he refuses to entertain any of Cassian's questions for planning an escape and even gets pissed at him when he asks. And it's brutal seeing him and his remaining hope get completely shattered when he learns that no one was getting released. But then when he finally answers Cass's questions, it's so hype.
How many guards on each level?
Never more than 12.
Their interactions in general are really great, but I especially liked how Cass is able to re-inspire him from a broken man to the leading voice of the escape. Seeing him go through this arc of crumbling and then building himself back up just made that last moment even more heartbreaking. And that's another thing I loved about Andor. It's not afraid to create stakes and adhere to them. Take the Aldhani heist, for instance. They spend multiple episodes building it up and telling us how it's going to be very dangerous, very difficult to pull off, and there's a good chance that they don't come out of there alive. In almost every case in the other Star Wars shows where there's this dangerous plan the characters need to do, it ends up falling flat because the characters get bailed out and almost everyone survives 99% of the time. You'll have like one side character who's a sacrificial lamb and that's it. And doing this not only kneecaps the plot in question, but also blunts the audience's trust and investment. Why would I believe a character's smart and capable if I don't see them actually be that and get out of some sticky situations themselves? Why would I believe that anyone's really in danger if I've seen that the plot will do somersaults to let them live? Well, in the Aldhani heist, we see that Andor wasn't going to do that shit. It was very difficult to pull off. Even though their plan was really well thought out, things went wrong. But they managed to still succeed not because of some miraculous convenience, but because they got themselves out of it. And it was very dangerous. We saw almost all these characters that the show spent time developing over the past couple episodes die. And it wasn't some melodramatic bullshit either. They died, but the other characters had to keep going or they would die too. So when a scene like the prison escape happens, there's tension, not just because you like the characters and want to see them escape, but because we saw that they're not just going to give every character plot armor so everyone can escape and go live happily ever after. There's tragedy and loss weaved into every success, just like how a real rebellion would be, and it makes actions and decisions feel like they actually matter. And this extends to smaller decisions too. Again, Cassian killing those guards could have been used as a starting off point and then just thrown away. But there are real consequences to that action. He triggers a manhunt on himself, which leads to multiple deaths of people he knows, Bix being captured and tortured, and then the Empire coming back to actively occupy Ferrix. You also have Tim and Nurchi both snitching on Cass, which ends up resulting in their deaths. I'm not saying that every choice needs to be life or death, but adding implications to these smaller but important decisions gives more weight to them and makes for a more interesting narrative. Another benefit of actually having and following through on stakes is that you don't need to randomly undermine your antagonistic force, and I'm so glad this is the case for Andor because they do such a good job with the Imperials. They're not just a bunch of blundering dumbasses with ships and armies that would get decimated by a gust of wind. They're competent and cunning, and even though the TIE fighters don't do a whole lot, I love how dangerous they made a single one feel, as opposed to having 40,000 of them flying around the screen doing jack shit. I especially love the angle that they took, where they believe in serving the Empire, but they're also very career-oriented and want to be the best at their job and climb the corporate ladder, instead of just being vaguely evil people. Obviously, the two Imperials we follow most closely are Cyril and Dedra, and I think they're both great. Cyril could have so easily been a terrible character, and honestly, I'm sure had he been in a different Star Wars show, he probably would have been. I mean, for the majority of the season, he's just sitting around depressed that he lost his job. But the reason why he works is again because they actually took the time to write him and develop him. Him being so obsessed with his job and serving the Empire to the point where when he was without it, he felt purposeless and all he could do is try to find a way back in was really compelling. And again, all the conversations he has with his mom could have made me want to take a drive up to the nearest bridge. But they were well written, and I liked how judgmental the mom is and how fed up with her Cyril is. I mean, she calls him a pussy for wearing a high collar. That's awesome.
What is it that you hear my collar saying?
Look at me. I don't believe in myself. I am desperate for approval.
And while his obsession is what made him great at his job, it's also what makes him a weirdo, and I love that. He probably goes to sleep with a picture of Cassian on his ceiling, while Cass barely even knows he exists. And then he basically stalks Dedra around because he wants his job back, and got horny from the way she served the Empire. And to be clear, I'm not condoning stalking. It was just funny seeing him pull up and Dedra being cringed out and concerned. Also, I like the weird little relationship they got going on. It's kind of gross, but in a fun way. That brings me to Dedra. She's a stone cold bitch and I love it. She is so goddamn good and ruthless in that Bix interrogation.
You're not gonna believe me anyway, are you? No. I suppose not.
We don't need any character being like, oh wow, Dedra is the smartest up-and-coming ISB agent, because we see that she knows what she's doing. She shows it in the interrogation. She shows it by finding the patterns in stolen equipment. And she shows it by dunking on Blevin. And the times we do get dialogue about that, it's between her and her superior, Major Partagaz, which feel like real conversations and are entertaining because of their dynamic, and the fact that he's also a sick character. I loved his little analogy of them being healthcare workers purging diseases from the Empire, and he's also pretty fucking funny. And the last thing I wanted to mention about the Imperials, specifically Cyril and Dedra, is that while they are competent, they also have incompetence written into their characters, but in a thoughtful way. They're smart, driven, and ruthless, but once they got all confident and went out into the field, they get bitched because that's not who they are. They're office workers, not soldiers. Seeing their overconfidence and their underestimation of the Ferrix locals contrast with how scared and frail they were on the ground was a really entertaining and smart way to show their flaws without making them caricatures. Without question, character building is one of Andor's greatest strengths, and a big part of this is letting their personalities come out through how they act and how they interact with others. For instance, of course part of the reason Luthen is such a great character is because Stellan Skarsgård's amazing, but his dialogue with others is written so well. I mean, he's got so many bars throughout the show.
We need the Empire to help. We need them angry. Oppression breeds rebellion.
Now listen! That's called motherfucking bars, nigga! You know nothing about that!
And most people point to his phenomenal monologue about sacrificing everything.
I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see.
But we also actively see how he has sacrificed everything from his morals and conscience to his chance to ever live peacefully without constant paranoia. He passively threatens the Imperial double agent's daughter at the start of their convo. He tasks Vel to go find and kill Cassian so they don't have loose ends. He's constantly speaking in code and denying involvement in things, even with his associates. Yes, he goes to Ferrix at the end, which was a little questionable considering how risky it was, and again how paranoid he is, but mostly he actually acts carefully and isn't a bumbling idiot. I love how they give him actual challenging situations as well, like when Saw decided he wanted to team up with Krieger after Luthen found out that Krieger was being set up to die. He knows he has to sacrifice Krieger since his inside source to the Imperials is more valuable, but then he has to convince Saw that it's worth the sacrifice while tiptoeing around giving information about where he learned that Krieger will die. Or when Mothma gets mad at him for the Aldhani heist causing the Empire to retaliate on everyone, he basically tells her to stop being a little bitch and that they need the Empire to overreact and they need suffering for there to be a chance for change.
We need the fear. We need them to overreact. The Empire has been choking us so slowly we're starting not to notice.
Speaking of Mothma, I was surprised at how much I liked her character and plotline. After seeing all the political plots in the other shows, I was fully expecting her to be yet another piece of cardboard, but she feels probably the most human out of any of the characters. You have smaller details like her looking defeated after bombing some Senate speeches, but then you also have her activism being a source of conflict in her family dynamic, which is super compelling. She deeply cares about being a positive force in the galaxy, and you can see this from her obviously supporting the rebels, but also in the little things, like getting annoyed at her husband Perrin for repeatedly forgetting her driver's name. But Perrin just wants to enjoy his life and their riches and doesn't want to feel judged for what he does and who he associates with. It felt like a real marriage between two people who just aren't meant to be and know it. I also thought it was cool seeing her idealistic view of the rebellion start to fade away at the end, as she realizes that she's not going to be able to make a real change and protect every single person, including her daughter. To be clear, I don't think every character is perfect, but everything is written so well that even their flaws somewhat work narratively. Cinta is easily the least interesting character to me, and I never thought that her relationship with Vel that the show half commits to felt real. A little hand-on-hand action and Vel going, "You're bleeding," over a small scratch on her hand when the streets are getting shot and blown up just didn't do it for me. But even then, I actually do like the dynamic that they start to show between them in the later episodes. Namely, it really starts to feel like Vel is someone who's in this deep because she fell in love with someone who's obsessed with the cause. She's clearly committed, but moments like her being scared before the heist or her prioritizing Cinta over everything else make it seem like she's the real reason that Vel's there. And you see how the feelings are not at all reciprocated in the same way. When they're on Ferrix looking out for Cassian, you can see Cinta so preoccupied on her duties that she stares right past Vel during their conversation, and also doesn't even blink when she says that she's willing to stay there alone for an indefinite amount of time if needed. As much as I didn't care for them as a couple, seeing Vel come to the realization that it probably won't work with Cinta because she'll never be half as important to her as the cause is, was actually pretty damn good in my opinion. I also was a bit mixed on what they did with Skeen there at the end. I get that we don't really know him, but it felt a bit out of nowhere to see him flip like that, and we see that he really does seem to care about Nemik, so it's a bit questionable that he just say fuck it, steal everything, and leave them there stranded. But with how his and Cassian's characters are written, I think it's a very reasonable interpretation that Skeen wasn't actually trying to do that, but was more so just doing a final test on Cass to see if he's loyal, and then gets popped. We see multiple times how Skeen questions Cassian and his motivations, and even how he doesn't really do it in the safest or smartest way. He saw multiple times how Cassian got aggressive when people touched him or his things, and then he went through his stuff while he slept and snatched the Kyber crystal off of him. We also see how Cass has zero patience for bullshit or games, so he easily could have shot him there for all Skeen knew, and maybe he would have if no one else was around. So it makes sense from what we've seen from both of them that Skeen was maybe trying to be a big brain and expose Cassian, but didn't take into account that Cassian will kill you if you give him even a slight reason to. Again, you could take almost any character in the show and you'll see that they're really well done for what they are. I mean, I cared more about a droid here than almost any character in the other shows. They just do a great job at knowing how much time to spend fleshing out each character, being efficient with that time, and also knowing when to let go of a character when they've reached their full potential. I know that some people have criticized Andor for being woke and giving a lot of importance and time to female characters, but that just doesn't feel like a valid criticism for this show. I think it can be a valid criticism for a project if the characters feel inorganic or like a bunch of token characters just thrown in there to meet a quota, but that's not the case with these characters. They have depth and purpose in the show which feel organic. At the end of the day, if you tell me a good story and put care into the writing, I don't give a fuck if the main character is a man, a woman, or a horse with 3 penises. So what made Andor the best live-action Star Wars show? It really boils down to effort to me. There wasn't anything inherent about the story or the premise that made this excellent. It was the fact that the writing and the performances made you care about what was happening. And there's not a whole lot of proof out there because Disney holds their secrets closer to their chest than the FBI, but there seems to have been a lot of shit happening behind the scenes in some of the shows that stunted them and their ability to develop into what they wanted to be. And you can really feel that while watching. I mean, I don't need a source to know that the whole Mandalorian Season 3 and Book of Boba Fett shit was 100% Disney getting their grubby little hands in there. But you have rumors that management and marketing cornered Jon Favreau into abandoning the Luke and Grogu plotlines so their precious little money printer Baby Yoda could still be on screen all the time. You have rumors that a bunch of Book of Boba Fett was cut to make space for the Mandalorian episodes, and that the finale was being rewritten and reshot in the final weeks before it was released, and also that a bunch of bullshit like the mods and Vespa scenes were added in to appease management. But then you also have facts like how in October 2020, Favreau originally announced Season 3 would begin production by the end of the year, only for him to come out a few months later and say it'll actually start after Book of Boba Fett finishes. Or how he's basically fully stepping away from the franchise after the Mandalorian and Grogu movie. I mean, this shit's got people saying that the scene of Paz dying in Season 3 is an allegory for Disney management killing his direction and production wishes since he voices Paz, and the Praetorian guards that kill him are from the new trilogy. Similarly, there's a bunch of rumors and confirmed things out there on production issues or management intervention for some of the other disappointing shows. Obi Wan Kenobi was originally supposed to be a movie back in 2013, but was in production hell for almost a decade. And even then, you had people who worked on the show come out afterwards and say how they didn't have much time to work on it and it was a very compressed process. You got the Acolyte somehow having pre-production costs of over $49 million, which is $5.5 million more than Rogue One's pre-production costs, and then rumors of it needing significant rewrites and reworks due to poor test screening, which explains why it took so long to come out and still felt undercooked. On the other hand, the only thing I could find about Andor is that it was originally intended to be a sort of buddy movie between Cassian and K2SO, when Tony Gilroy told him that it was fine but unsustainable, and then wrote a fucking manifesto about why they should do his idea for Andor instead. Tony Gilroy's a fucking legend, man. Regardless, the fact that people like me feel the need to search for an explanation for what went wrong behind the scenes because your shows feel like early stage drafts that got aggressively tampered with says a lot about the quality of writing. Oops. Look, I really wanted to make this shorter, but I felt it was important to spend some time on each show and be objective on their quality. It's easy to just shit on the current state of Star Wars, and it's frankly deserved with how consistently disappointing the output's been. The shows aren't as bad as the general word of mouth would make you think, but Disney just can't afford to keep putting out uninspired and underwritten projects and expect the name Star Wars to continue to hold weight and bring in viewers. Whether it was caused by management intervention or them just being content with churning out low-risk, low-effort shows, or both, they need to realize that they need shows like Andor, which breathe thought and care. And they need to do it fast or the last of the franchise's goodwill is going to be gone.